Joining me virtually now from Washington, D.C. to discuss the latest developments in Ukraine is President Emeritus, International Stability Operation Association, Doug Brooks. Good to have you join us.
A pleasure to be here.
First, it was Severodonetsk, and now Ukraine has also lost Lysychansk. How strategic is or what is the strategic implication of this loss of territories for Ukraine?
Well, it's definitely a problem for Ukraine, but keep in mind it has taken Russia weeks and weeks and weeks to capture two medium-sized cities. And the amount of casualties that they've taken to grab these two cities has been just enormous. And in the meantime, the Ukrainians have made advances in the north and also in the south towards Kherson. So the war is still going back and forth. It's the problem, of course, is that the war is taking place inside Ukraine. So all the damage and bombing and shelling is hurting Ukraine the longer the war continues.
For Russia to claim victory, having claimed some territories or taken over territories in Ukraine rather.
Yeah, so Russia is claiming victory, and keep in mind, of course, the original goal of Russia was regime change in Ukraine when they did their initial disastrous drive on Kiev, and that failed completely. With enormous casualties. So now, though, they focused on the east, on these two so-called independent republics that they've created there, and they're trying to say, okay, well, we're grabbing everything that these republics should have. They're forcing the people of those republics to essentially fight a lot of the war and take a lot of the casualties. But these are artificial republics, and Russia's going to have to try to maintain these so-called republics in the face of a lot of Ukrainian nationalists living on that side of the border that are causing a lot of problems. So it means an occupation, a military occupation, for as long as they stay there. But it's not clear that the Ukrainians are simply giving up. They may yet do counteroffensives with the new weapons they're getting from the West.
Lysychansk was the last territory for Russia to take over. Russia needed to take over the Luhansk region, which now means that Russia is turning its attention to the Donetsk region. Once Russia can take the Donetsk region, it means that Russia has the Donbas region. What do you expect to see in the coming days, and what's your projection? Do you think that Russia can successfully take the Donetsk region?
Well, it's been pretty interesting. The way the Russians do their offensives is they use a lot of artillery, and that's the one real superiority they have over the Ukrainians. So essentially, their offensives are very short range. I mean, early in the war, they were trying to do these long-range drives and pincher movements. They can't do that. They can't take on the Ukrainians without their artillery. So their movements are, as we've seen, have been very, very slow and very artillery-heavy, just destroying the terrain as they advance. That's all they can do. So yes, they've grabbed this region. There's a few other areas that they probably like to grab before they sort of declare victory or try and come to some sort of negotiated solution. But the way they're doing it is they're losing a lot of people, a lot of their military. It's been shattered. Their equipment's being used up at a rate that they can't replace. It's without the hope they're essentially they're going to have to beg the Ukrainians to come to some sort of negotiated at least stalemate. We'll see if that happens.
And you mentioned the use of artillery weapons, and that's the advantage Russia has over Ukraine. And that, I guess that's why the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, continues to ask the West to send Ukraine more sophisticated weapons. But there is a threat from Russia that if the West does send sophisticated weapons to Russia, it means that that particular country is now, Russia would take that country to be part of the war and might also invade that country. Do you think that the West should overlook the threat coming from Russia and send more sophisticated weapons to Ukraine? How should the West react?
The Russians have been excelling in threats to the West. They have threatened on numerous occasions that they may go nuclear or they may use chemical weapons. And they hint at this sort of thing. They have yet to do it because they know they can't take on NATO. And NATO is unified in their support for Ukraine. So yes, the West is going to continue to send more and better long-range weapons. They're much more accurate than the old Soviet-era equipment the Russians are using. It's the longer this goes on, you're going to have more Ukrainian troops that are trained and moving towards the front. Russia can't match that unless they do a general mobilization, which they're not going to do. So the longer this goes on, the more problem it's going to be for Russia. And yes, they can continue to escalate the rhetoric and say, "Oh, we're going to, threaten to attack a NATO country or threaten to attack the Baltic states." They're not going to. They can't, because they know they would. As many problems as they're having in Ukraine, which is a much smaller country, taking on all of NATO is just not going to happen.
There are already reports of artillery shelling in parts of Lysychansk. That's in Donetsk region. We'll see how things play out in Ukraine. Thank you so much for talking to us. The President Emeritus, International Stability Operation Association, Doug Brooks.